Alex Jones. Are you? I saw that. Welcome back. Welcome back. How is everybody? Yeah? Are you excited to hear Jim Mars? Now, first interview I ever did about 6 years ago, Jim Mars was gracious enough to grant me that interview. And so we heard Dr. Farrell this morning mention Nurgle. We have the real Nurgle, or Mars, here. Author and journalist and co-screenwriter, Jim Mars.
Unique. Do I need this? Okay. Okay. Thank you, Jim Mars, better known as Obi-Wan Can Know Nothing. It's a pleasure to be with y'all today, and I want to tell you I'm really, really gratified and slightly amazed to see this many people show up in this bad weather to talk about space aliens and secret space programs and stuff. So I tip my hat to each and every one of you, and I honor you for taking time out of your busy schedules and tearing yourself away from that idiot box and, actually coming out and trying to learn something about what's really going on in the world. When I was invited to come and speak here, I thought, what am I going to speak on? I said, number one, some of you folks probably know about as much or more about secret space program as I do. And so I thought, what am I going to talk about? And then I realized, okay, number one, I'm sure many of you probably are either unaware or have not learned much about remote viewing. And then also I wanted to tell you why I am somebody who's worth listening to on a secret space program convention. So I'm going to start off here by talking about secret space program leaks. These are people that I personally have met with, talked to, interviewed over the years, and that has convinced me that yes, number one, there are extraterrestrials, there are non-humans operating in and around this planet, and two, that we have secret technology that is not known generally to the public. Not all these people were necessarily leakers, and so maybe I should have said sources. I think I said insider sources. And I go all the way back. I've been at it for a long time. I can show you that I drew a watercolor picture back in 1957, I believe it was, when there was a UFO situation in Levelland, Texas, out in West Texas, and I was reading the news reports, and I drew this picture, which I still have. So, see, I can guarantee you I've been keeping up with UFOs since the mid-50s, all right, just shortly after the whole thing got started. Oh, excuse me. In the course of my journalistic career, I have had a chance to interview some pretty credible people like Dr. Edward Teller, grandfather of the H-bomb, who, by the way, when asked about ozone holes, said, well, perhaps it'd be a good idea to put pulverized gold in the upper atmosphere and spray the upper atmosphere with these heavy metals to plug up the ozone holes. Is that what they're doing with chemtrails? It would seem so. Dr. Philip Corso, of course, most of y'all are familiar with him, who he said he was one of those who not only saw craft and bodies, but actually passed alien technology on to our military-industrial complex, all right? And here's the way this works, and it's really easy, and it's also easy to see how that it's easy to deny this. For example, he told about receiving lenses off of aliens that enabled night vision. He took one of these lenses one time and he met for just 1 hour, one time, with a fellow in a big university who was studying night vision, and he showed him the lens. And the guy looked at it, saw what it was made out of, how it was configured, and went, whoa. He said, what I love, he said, where'd you get this? And Corso, under orders, he says, France. And it sounds like a conehead joke, but that was the deal. They got it in France, okay? One time, 1 hour, he's met the guy saw this and put him on the way, and now this fella is now accredited with developing night vision. And I don't want to take anything away from him because he really did. He worked hard on it before, he worked on it after, but you see how that just one little thing can put someone off on the trail to new technology. J. Allen Hynek, I met and interviewed J. Allen Hynek after he had had his conversion. Those of you who know about Dr. Hynek know that he started off as a government stooge, trying to tell everybody that there was no such things as UFOs. In fact, he got in big trouble up in Michigan when a UFO was seen around this college, and J. Allen Hynek got up and said, well, what they saw was swamp gas. All right, and boy, he got hammered for that. In fact, Gerald Ford, who was their representative at the time, was so incensed because so many people called and screamed at him about that he said he was going to set up a congressional panel to study impartially and in depth the situation of UFOs. He never did it, but he got named president, so he got his reward, didn't he? Master Sergeant Bob Dean, I'm sure a lot of you know Bob Dean, what a great guy he is. He was the highest ranking NCO in NATO, and as such was able to read some of their briefing stuff, which talked about spacecraft, talked about aliens. Okay, so see, these people are not science fiction writers, and they're not conspiracy theorists. Dr. Bruce Maccabee, very well and incredible photographer, analyst, okay? And then, of course, Joseph Blumrich, who worked for NASA and wrote the book, The Gods of Ezekiel. I interviewed him, and his idea was he started off as a NASA official who was totally opposed to the idea of UFOs and aliens coming here and all like that. And so when he heard that somebody, it was probably von Daniken, who pointed out that the account in the Old Testament of Ezekiel and the fiery wheels certainly sounded like he was observing some sort of airborne craft. So Blumrich says, okay, I'll point out how stupid that is. So he went back and meticulously studied the subject and sketched up the way it was described in the Bible, and lo and behold, he did a 180. He came back and he says, this sounds like a landing craft, So those are the people that I've talked to personally. Others include my friend Dave Hodges, and I don't know if you all listen to him. He sometimes goes out on a limb, but his heart's in the right place. His claim to fame is that his father worked very closely with the paperclip Nazi scientist. And he says that some of the scientific breakthroughs that these Nazi scientists got, that they were quite open in saying that they were of extraterrestrial origin. Now that, of course, comes into play about, well, wait a minute, what did the Nazis get? Well, we know the Nazis at the end of World War II had some extremely exotic and futuristic technologies. The A-10 three-stage rocket, the V-1 rocket, the V-2 rocket, the Nazi Bell, which was an energy manipulation device. It's really incredible. You can read a lot of that in my book, Rise of the Fourth Reich, which unfortunately I don't think I have a copy here, but you can still get them at a bookstore or on my website. Dave Hodges says there is the Newtonian science that our children are taught and which underlies our primitive technology. And there is the hyperdimensional physics technology that the elite control. It is the technology that the Black Ops military space program utilizes to explore the solar system, okay? So now these are coming from, these are not conspiracy theorists, and they're not science fiction writers. And speaking of our paperclip, this is very, very important to understand how the space program came into being, because we all know that Dornberger and Werner von Braun and these guys were top Nazi rocket scientists, and after the war we brought them over here and rolled them into our military-industrial complex, and they were the very beginning of our space program. In fact, those of you who are my age or older, you remember the old newsreels showing those V-2 rockets going up. In fact, when I was a kid, one of my favorite shows on TV was Rod Brown of the Rocket Rangers, and every time they went off in a rocket, it was a V-2, basically, okay? So look how far we've come. Well, they also, by the way, brought in their mind control experts, and this is why that the American public today is being drugged down and dumbed down and manipulated unmercifully by the media and by the politicians who have learned through these mind control techniques how to manipulate large bodies of people. But what happened there at the time the Nazi scientists came over here was that an almost equal number went into Russia. And what we now know is that they were in secret contact with each other. And I think this was by design, because the people who actually are manipulating world events, and we're talking about the bankers of Wall Street and of the City of London, who funded Hitler, created the Third Reich, and then got fearful because they were afraid that the Nazis were going to take over the world and that Germany would then control the world economy. And they didn't want that. Winston Churchill, even during the war, wrote, he said, the current war is not against National Socialism, which is Nazis. He says it is against the economic power of the German people, and it must be destroyed. I don't care if a Jesuit priest is in charge. So they weren't really after Hitler, and they weren't really after the Nazis. In fact, they created National Socialism as a bloc in Europe against the spread of communism, which they also created. But it got out of hand. Once Lenin died and Stalin took over, then he was an ironclad dictator, and then he also allowed the creation of the Internationale, okay? Workers of the world unite. Well, that scared the pants off of the Western bankers and corporate owners and everything, so they said it's got to be stopped. So they created National Socialism in Germany, all right, as a bloc. And the only real difference between the Nazis and the communists, the socialist game plan was the same in both instances. The only difference is that the Russians were trying to take communism worldwide, and the Nazis were pretty much content to leave it as within the national boundaries, saying Germany is on top and we'll run everything. So this leadership, this global elite that were creating all this, and then Hitler, of course, got out of hand. They had to band up all their resources in 26 nations to go and stop Hitler, which they did. It's known as World War II. So after the war, though, they really got interested in space flight, and they didn't want the Russians to dominate space. They didn't want the United States to dominate space. They wanted to dominate space. So they kept the whole thing compartmentalized. And while America was building very sophisticated guidance systems and trajectories and computers to run our rocket program, in Russia they were building just big old heavy lift rockets that put up big payloads. And as a result, they got ahead because they were the first to put up Sputnik. They were first to put up Laika the dog. They were first to put a woman in space. They were first to put a man in space. And that made us fearful. We said, oh my goodness, we got to do something here. So what did we do? We put a crash Apollo program together, and President Kennedy pledged that we would have a man on the moon by the next decade, which would have been 1970. And so then it got to be the summer of 1969, and that deadline was getting really, really close. And somehow or another, we managed to have Apollo landing on the moon in August of 1969 and showed the world that we were dominant in space, okay? But I think away from the headlines and away from the newsreels, you've got these globalists, these financiers, and they're putting the two technologies together along with the energy manipulation. Translates into anti-gravity. So I think for all these years that we saw our tax money blowing up in smoke from Cape Canaveral over in the Okefenokee swamp, they were lifting off and heading right on off. This was the secret space program. Now, do I really believe in that? And yes, I do. And this again comes back to people I have known and spoken to and interviewed and got to know personally. One of them is Bill Pollock. He was a computer and keyless entry specialist. So they came to him when they wanted an entranceway that nobody could get into. And as a result, he ended up going to Area 51, to the Tonopah Test Range in Nevada, and he would go down in those deep, deep levels underground to install, to inspect, and to design keyless entries. You know, the one where you put your eye to the keyhole and you read the iris and put your thumbprint on, put your handprint on, and which I'm sure was very exciting and rewarding work. The one thing he told me about that still bugs me to this day is that he worked in association with a company at one time that the government ordered 2 billion microchips from. And he knows they produced them, but he doesn't know what happened to them. And I don't know what happened to them. What worries me is we may all be carrying them around inside ourselves right now. So, and that's, I'm not saying that's true, I'm just saying they have the capability. He also met the Nazi paperclip scientist, and he knows the same thing that Bill knew. Not Bill, but Dave Hodges knew that they got their technology from aliens, okay? Now, I talked to him probably back in the mid-2000s, but he told me that he didn't want me to use his name, and he didn't want his material out until after he died. And he died from cancer in 2007. And so now I can talk about it. His wife, Annie, is still a good friend of mine, and she knows all about this. And so I would encourage you to listen to Dave Hodges and to go on YouTube and type in Bill Pollock and listen to the lengthy confession or statement that he made prior to his death. Another one is Boyd Bushman, who I met there in Fort Worth. He was was a senior scientist for several of the defense contractors, including General Dynamics and others. And of course, they try to say that, well, he's just a nut. Yeah, well, this nut holds 28 patents, most of which are still classified. And his big thing was anti-gravity. He told me just outright, yeah, we got anti-gravity, okay? He also mentioned aliens in Area 51 and that they were working on faster than light travel because the aliens have faster than light flight technology. He even went into some detail as to the different sizes of the little grays, et cetera, et cetera. And he also confirmed that they use telepathy to communicate. But of course, as in the case of all of these sources, or whistleblowers, if you want to call them that, then immediately there's a backlash, and people go, that's not right, oh, they're crazy, oh, they're hoaxers, you know. But I'm telling you, these are people I met with and met personally, and I'm telling you one thing, they may be crazy, and they may be just totally mistaken about things, but they're not hoaxers. These people believe what they're saying. My favorite is Richard Thalman, who you probably may have never even heard about. I met him in New York, and he told me he had just gotten back from a mission to Venus. And my good friend Linda Howe, as she says, Venus, you can't go to Venus, the atmosphere is bad, it's too hot, you know, you can never survive there. Richard told me that they had operated on him prior to his trip to Venus, and that they had opened him up and done some operation inside to where he could physically handle the atmosphere, or at least the situation he found at this base on Venus. And he proceeded to open up his shirt and showed me he had a scar that went from the bottom of his neck to below his navel, okay? Now, I've been a reporter for about 50 years. The closest scars I've seen like that are autopsies, okay? This is one of the strangest, longest scars I believe I've ever seen. So here's some physical evidence, and he was dead serious. Tell me all about this. Now, some of you may recall that in 2008, there were stories that surfaced about a meeting within the UN with certain representatives of countries to alert them to the fact that UFOs and aliens are real, and that there will be coming a time very soon when they need to prepare the people in their countries for disclosure, for the fact that, yeah, we're not alone. Richard Thalman was one of those Navy presenters who were at the meetings at the United Nations. And he told me about all that. Now, of course, immediately, if you go Google his name, you're going to find all kinds of websites where they say, well, he's a phony, he's a hoaxer, he's nothing. Again, talking to him and meeting him in person, he explained to me that he had been in the Navy for a good number of years, and that he was in the Navy back in the 70s when it was analog, and that they had destroyed all his records. And that, and then when they went digital, they just never made the files on him. So yes, it's true. You're not going to find any files on him, just like you're not probably going to find any files on Boyd Bushman, or some of these other people. When you're sheep dipped, okay? And some of you may think, what do you mean by sheep dip? That is a term they use for somebody who is in the military, who they decide they want to use as an asset doing something outside the military. So they either have a formal retirement, or they kick them out of the service, sometimes with a good record, sometimes with a bad record, but then they separate technically and officially any service, and yet they continue to work for the military and report back. And Richard Tallman is one of those. Here we see in the white uniform with this rank of medals he's got. I cropped this picture down, but he was there with his wife. Okay, now there are some, to show how they go, there's some sites that say his ex-wife, they're divorced now, that she says, oh, he was never in the Navy. Okay, and I'm like, well, that's just what the debunker wants to hear. So that gets spread all over the place. According to Richard and other people who have really studied this case, she was primed to say that. She promised him she would say that. He said, if anybody asks, I was not in the Navy, because he's sheep dipped. He's out of there. Now, to me, the crowning point of Richard Tallman, who, by the way, has now gone into hiding because he just caught so much crap, if you pardon the expression, was the fact that he appeared at Navy League and Navy Order meetings in his uniform with this whole rank of medals. And when it came up and the debunkers started claiming that he was never in the Navy, he never had these medals, well, that brought up the question of stolen valor. This is what they call it when somebody claims to have some military medal of honor of some sort, and it's all a hoax and a fake. And by the way, these are criminal acts and are strongly punished under federal laws. So some of the people, including the head of some of these Navy organizations, said, well, we don't want somebody like that in there. They actually got hold of the FBI. FBI came, and they took him in, closed session, talked to him a while, then talked to some of his so-called superiors, and they went away. No charges filed. Nothing ever said since. In fact, I've talked with people who accompanied Richard to classified installations, high security installations. Okay, this tells me that he's the real article. So yes, we've been to space. Just a few other people, by the way, that confirmed these United Nations meetings were Mr. Karim, the president of the UN General Assembly, and a French auditor named Gilles Laurent. And of course, you all have heard, I'm sure, of Catherine Austin Fitts. I understand you're going to be hearing from her in person tomorrow. You might ask her about this. But way back, I think even before the news came out about the 2008 meetings at the United Nations, she was publicly stating that she had met with a group of high-level people in the military, including the Undersecretary of the Navy. And by the way, it's the Navy that keeps coming up, right? Let me tell you where they've thrown us off the track some. If you go back and study the Air Force, which is, everybody turns to the Air Force when it comes to UFOs, but the Air Force didn't even come into being until 1947, right? So they weren't even there early on. And before that, who was in charge of unconventional aircraft and the study of exotic technology? The Navy, okay? So this is one reason why everybody files Freedom of Information Acts against the Air Force, going, tell us everything you know about UFOs, and the Air Force says, well, we don't know that much, and it's probably the truth, okay? In fact, you go, here's what's interesting to me. I have some documents signed by George Marshall the chief of staff of Franklin Roosevelt, talking about the great Los Angeles air raid of 1942. If you don't know anything about that, y'all look into it. It's a really fascinating story. Something happened in the skies over Los Angeles. People died. Anti-aircraft ordnance was expended. It went on for hours. And then later we were told nationwide that by the Secretary of War that it was just a matter of nerves, just nervousness. You know, they were shooting at nothing. And yet the document I have in my files, signed by George Marshall, said that he had learned of the recovery of unconventional aircraft in the hills of San Bernardino following this raid, and that the Navy announced they had recovered unconventional aircraft off the coast of California. Apparently, we managed to bring something down. Very, very interesting stuff. Okay, but what really got my attention was on this very document. Down at the bottom, there was a paragraph that said, written by Marshall, who said, "I have ordered a thorough search of War Department files for any accounts of unconventional aircraft dating back to 1897, the very year of the Aurora spaceship crash." And I now live just about 5 or 6 miles from Aurora, north of Fort Worth, about 20 miles north of Fort Worth. And according to stories in the Dallas Morning News, which is still in publication, and printed in April the 19th, 1897, a cylindrical metallic object came lower to the earth, exploded, and scattered into pieces all around the town of Aurora. And about the third or fourth paragraph said the pilot, whose remains were badly disfigured, but enough was collected to show he was not an inhabitant of this world. So, wow. In Washington, as early as 1942, and probably a long time before, they knew that all of this was true, but they had to keep it quiet. Now, why would they want to keep it quiet? Well, of course, they'll tell you the easy, facile information is that they didn't want the public to panic, okay? And there may be something to that, because we all know the story of what happened in 1937, 38, when they did the War of the Worlds broadcast, okay, by Orson Welles. And what happened there simply is that they went nationwide with the broadcast, and it sounded like at the very beginning of it, they made it very clear that this was a Halloween production, and that they were dramatizing H.G. Wells' novel, science fiction novel, War of the Worlds. And so they made that very clear from the very beginning. The problem was a lot of people tuned in late, and they didn't hear the disclaimer. All they heard was, we interrupt this program to bring you news bulletin from New Jersey. These cylinders have fallen. Oh, my God, they're opening. And, oh, my God, these monsters are coming out. Oh, my God, they're eating everybody. And they're setting the countryside on fire, you know. No wonder people panicked. I don't think we'd have that today. There's still those who cling to the idea that the public couldn't stand the information. I totally disagree. I think because there's so many generations now that have been brought up on Star Trek and Star Wars that, you know, if President Obama or any political figure got up and said, okay, folks, we've got really good, credible information that there are life outside this earth. We've been in some cursory contact. We don't see that there's any threat. And your government's on the ball, and we're going to try to clarify the situation, and we'll keep you apprised. Everybody going to run out and cut their wrist and riot in the streets? I don't think so. But that's the attitude that's still going on. Vance Davis, you may remember the story of the 6 AWOL soldiers that left Germany and then came over here and were caught over near Gulf Breeze, Florida. And they, too, were confirming the alien visitation and that humans are being genetically manipulated by aliens. So you've got all these people, but, of course, any one of them you care to look at, there will be the debunkers, the detractors, who will say, well, they're nuts, they're crazy. And that, my friends, is the nature of the cover-up. It's just like the Kennedy assassination, just like 9/11, just like space aliens. It's not the classic cover-up in the sense that you can't get to the information. It's the cover-up by obfuscation, okay? They throw out so many red herrings and straw men and claims and counterclaims that the average guy goes, man, whoa, That's enough. I don't want to hear any more about it. It overloads my brain. And this is what they're counting on. And again, this is why I honor you folks for coming here and actually talking seriously about these matters. Just to show you that I'm not sure what this means, but I found it very interesting. This is Army General Keith Alexander, who used to be head of the INSCOM, Intelligence Security Command, and he set up his Information Dominance Center to look like the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. Whoa. Now, is he just a true Trekkie? Or does he know something that we don't know? All right. Now, this comes back, and I'm going to quickly run through this about remote viewing aliens. All right. And, of course, first I have to explain for some of you. In fact, well, I can't really see that well, so I'm going to assume that there's some of you who probably are not even sure what remote viewing is. So let me point out that this goes back to the early 70s when there was a book published here, and it was quite successful, called Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain. And the authors pointed out that the Soviets were making headway in experimentation with psychic ability. Okay, now in the halls of the Pentagon, the old cigar chomping general said, well, that's a bunch of BS. Bah, that's not real. But hey, if the commies are doing it, we got to do it too. We can't let them get ahead. So we had a psychic race along with the arms race. And so the CIA got involved, and they started funding some experiments on psychic viewing, and they showed promise. They finally brought in SRI, Stanford Research Institute, and this is Russell Targ on the left and Hal Puthoff, both of whom I've met and spoken to. And they began to work and experiment with this remote viewing, and they found, much to their surprise, that it actually works. Then it became an official unit within the United States Army, again under the Intelligence and Security Command at Fort Meade, Maryland. And when I went up there, these buildings were still in existence. They've been bulldozed, they're long gone now. But these little clapboard buildings were a cook school for cooks, a school for cooks during World War II. And they had kind of become dilapidated, and so they turned them over to this small unit of about 25, 26 people who were studying remote viewing. Funny story there was Dave Morehouse told me that when he first went there to show up for working at the remote viewing unit, which at that time was going under the name Grill Flame, he said he looked at the old ramshackle wooden building from World War II, and he thought, holy cow, are we supposed to work in that? But then when he went up, he said the door was solid steel and had a keystroke, one of these keyboard locks on it, very, very modern and sophisticated lock. And he said he knew right then that they were really doing something in these buildings. Well, this is where what I call remote viewing central. I'm not going to go through all this, but for you who want to study, it was really interesting how that they developed the remote viewing. What I do want to tell you is just two quick things, miraculous things. One of the things they found was that each and every one of us has this ability, okay? Every one. They never tested anyone who did not have any ability at all to do this remote viewing. But of course, saying that we all have the ability to do remote viewing would be like me pointing to each of you and say, you have the ability to play Mozart on the piano, okay? We all do, but I guarantee you some of you are going to beat me by a mile playing Mozart on the piano. But let's think about it. And I feel confident in saying, if I took piano lessons and if I practiced day after day after day, after a while, yes, I could play Mozart on the piano. So yes, we all have the ability. Some naturally a little better than others, and some who have to work at it harder. The second thing they found, which is truly wild, is that this remote viewing is not limited by time or space. They can look back in time, they can look forward in time. But I've got to mention here, because I think this is, to me, is quite hopeful. When the remote viewers go back in time, everything's there. They can look at everything. There's the buildings, here's the people, here's this, that, and the other thing. The one thing they have trouble with is dates, because the only way they can't really read numbers. And there's a reason for that, because numbers are a human affectation. You know, that's just something we have in our head. In other words, if I've got an apple here and I've got an apple there, that's the reality. When I say there are two apples, that number two is just a construction that I've come up with. So they have a hard time with numbers. So if they try to date something in the past, they have to go by what the people look like, what they're wearing, what the vehicles look like, if there are any vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. But the past is the past, and it's there. When they go into the future, the immediate future, they can pretty well get a look at. The further they go into the future, the hazier, the more blurry it gets, which I find encouraging, because this to me tells me that the future may be on a predetermined course, but it's not etched in stone. We can still change the future by our actions today and how we act on things today. So keep that in mind. And space. They could also go out into space. This was proven back in the 70s when Ingo Swann and another fellow did a remote viewing session of Jupiter. And they came back and said, well, there's these mountains, high mountains, and there's this and that, and they were sketching this stuff up, and they said, by the way, Jupiter has a little ring around it. You know, kind of like like Jupiter, and I think I got confused here. They were remote viewing Saturn, okay, and they said they got a ring around it like Jupiter, and they said it's got high mountains, and they got clouds, and they got all this, and they were giving all this details and a magnetic field. And, of course, the scientists at the time, they didn't know. They said, well, that's just somebody speculating. We don't know about that. But then about 10 years later, they sent Voyager out there, and Voyager went to Jupiter and photographed, studied, sent back data, and lo and behold, everything that Ingo Swann and this fellow had said turned out to be 100% true. Again, more evidence that remote viewing is real. Now, the government doesn't want you to know this, so they've tried to poo-poo it. They try to act like there's nothing much to it. They even put out this movie, The Men Who Stare at Goats, where they took a few of the more extreme examples of the things they were doing to try to see what would work and then make it look like it was all a big joke, but it's not. The unit went through different changes: Grill Flame, Center Lane, Eagle Claw, Dragoon, Absorb, Sunstreak, and, of course, Stargate. These were some of the primary and best of the Army's remote viewers, and I've met and talked to every single one of them. Ingo Swann was quite a character. And they told me about how that there was this war in the ether, all right? How many of y'all have seen the Warner Brothers cartoon where the sheepdog and the wolf go to work together, and it's good morning, Fred, good morning, Ed. You know, they get ching and they chip in, and then they chase each other around doing their stuff. That was kind of the impression I got about the war in the ether. Early on, they would encounter their counterparts from the Soviet Union in their psychic journeys, and they go, uh-oh, the enemy. You know, but after a while, they realized that they weren't in their physical form, and neither were the extrasensors, which is what they called them in Russia. And so there wasn't anything they could actually do to each other. So it finally got to be, oh, hey, how are you? Okay, hi, you know, as they passed in the psychic world. And they saw all kinds of wild stuff. One of the things they saw was what they called a buckyball, named after Buckminster Fuller because it was multifaceted. And they saw these objects up in orbit around the Earth. And they said that every time a space mission went up and it was carrying a communication satellite or you know, something non-threatening, that nothing happened. They go up, satellites would go in orbit. That's why we have all these communication satellites up there. They said, but interestingly enough, on a few occasions when the military would say, there's going to be a launch next week, but we can't say anything about it as a classified mission, okay? And maybe they're trying to put weapons up in space. Maybe they're trying to put some kind of military hardware up there. One of these buckyballs would drop down and knock it out. And I can't tell you how many times working as a newsman that I kept my eye on a story about a launch, and they'd come back and go, gee, we lost it. What do you mean you lost it? You know, you went up, you got radar, you got everything else. What do you mean you lost it? Well, they lost it. And again, as what they call in remote viewing, the way you know whether it's true or not is when you get feedback and you find out, is there anything to that? So interestingly enough, here in 1994, we got space news, not exactly a conspiratorial rag. And we've got Air Force Colonel Frank Sterling talking about the loss of Titan IV. And they said, the first paragraph said, the explosion of Titan IV rocket appears to be linked to a solid rocket motor segment that was repaired several years ago, blah, blah. But in a strange twist, Sterling said he had also been told that the Air Force video of the launch shows an unidentified object apparently striking the Titan at an altitude of 110,000 feet shortly before the rocket blew up. Is this confirmation of a buckyball or whatever? And you know, this brings us to a current thing here. You might remember the Chelyabinsk meteor that exploded over Russia here just a few months back. And that was a tremendous thing. And it didn't hit the earth. It exploded, okay? Now, wait a minute. And now, as you can see in these bottom clips of cell phone and video footage, something appears to come out and strike this meteor before it can hit the earth and cause, can you imagine what kind of damage a meteor that size would have caused? That would have been fairly close to the one that hit the Gulf of Mexico and may have obliterated the dinosaurs. So are we still being looked at? Is this the secret space program, you know, defending us? Is this the UFOs trying to take care of us? Was this a missile, or maybe it was a buckyball? Another interesting thing with the remote viewers came from Pat Price, who was a former police officer and who turned out to be one of the best remote viewers they had. And early on, he showed up for work one day and said, hey, you know, I was doing a remote viewing session at home and I found 4 alien bases on the earth, you know. He said one of them's inside Mount Perdido in the Pyrenees, one in Mount Irigani in Zimbabwe, Mount Zeal in Alaska, and under Mount Hayes in Alaska. And of course, the people there just kind of looked at him funny and said, well, that's interesting. How do they know? How do we know if this is true or not? So some time went on, and after the grill flame unit got to operating pretty smoothly, a Captain Skip Atwater was put in charge of their training, and he told me that one day he decided he wanted to give them a really strange and exotic target. So he dug out the files about the 4 alien bases, and by coordinate number, in other words, you don't tell somebody what you want to go look at. If I tell you to go remote view the Eiffel Tower, you can sit right down and draw me a picture of the Eiffel Tower because you know what it looks like. That's not remote viewing. So to know that remote viewing is actually happening, if I want you to remote view the Eiffel Tower, I have to give you just a coordinate number, 24896742, okay? That's meaningless number, except in my mind, I understand that that connects to the Eiffel Tower that I want you to look at. And since Einstein's unified field theory and what we're more and more coming to understand, that the entire universe is just a big old frothy bunch of energy bubbling around, when I make that connection from that coordinate to the Eiffel Tower, that goes off as a thought wave, thought energy, okay? And if you're sensitive enough, you'll pick up on it. And when I give you that coordinate number, your mind will go, oh, that's the Eiffel Tower, and it'll take you to the Eiffel Tower. And then you begin to self-interrogate yourself, and you go, well, is it man-made or natural? Well, it's man-made. Is it big or small? It's big. Is it in Europe or North America? It's in Europe. Is it in a big city? Yes. Are the people around? Yes. Is it very hard? Yes. And you just keep going until you go, oh, it must be the Eiffel Tower. That's how the remote viewing works. And when you get 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 remote viewers going after the same target, then you get variations in what they see. But if you synthesize it, you can generally take that to the bank. So Atwater took all the remote viewers and gave them a coordinate for these 4 bases. And what did they do? They came back and confirmed 4 bases, the very ones that Pat Price had talked about. Absolutely amazing. What's amazing to me is that since we have this information, how come some of our sneaky Pete military people hadn't gone to these bases to find out what's going on there? I'm not sure they haven't, but we never hear about that. Okay, another example is in August of 1995 when we sent the Mars Observer And it was supposed to be, they had a lot of hoorah about that because it was supposed to go into orbit around Mars and photograph all these things like the face on Mars and all like that up very close, you know. Well, it was going into orbit around Mars, and again they said, gee, we lost it. So at that time, I was in close contact with all these military remote viewers, so I got in touch with them. I said, what happened to the Mars Observer? And they said the same thing that happened to the Phobos 2, which was a Russian ship that went to Mars. And in both cases, the remote viewers said that as these objects, we're going to take the Mars Observer, as it approached and was going into orbit around Mars, a cylindrical saucer-shaped object rose off the surface of Mars, went out, and then scanned it with electromagnetic energy. And they said that they did not get the impression that this was hostile or that there was any evil intent there. In fact, one of them said he thought the analogy was the tugboat going out to meet the Queen Mary. But they scanned the Mars Observer with their electromagnetic beams, and they realized it wasn't theirs. So the craft turned around and went back to Mars. But in doing so, when they scanned it, this scrambled the onboard computers of the Mars Observer. They lost control of it, and it fell into the atmosphere and was destroyed going down to Mars. Now, here we see the drawing that one of the remote viewers made, the landing gear, I believe, this of the Mars Observer, and this little object down here. They said this was the object that came off the surface of Mars. And here's a blow-up of it. So you can see it's not really circular. I don't know. It kind of looks like Illinois or some irregular shape. Okay, well, now that's odd enough. That's a strange story. Was there any feedback? And yes, there was. In 1980, in recent years, Soviet cosmonaut Marina Popovich came to the United States, visited, and in one news conference held up what she said was the last photograph taken from their Phobos 2 before they lost contact with that. And I would submit to you, you can see for yourself the similarity between the object that Phobos 2 photographed and the object that the remote viewers drew. Another one that we looked at by remote viewing was the Aztec, New Mexico crash of March 25th, 1948. That's been reported, talked about down through the years. In fact, it appeared in a story by Frank Scully back as far back as 1950. And they gave a whole account of this ship coming down. But did it happen or did it not? Oops, there went our photograph. Sorry, Linda, that was the photograph of you and me and Stan Freeman, all of us at Aztec, but just take my word for it, we were there. This is what happens when you take a PC program and put it on a Mac. Of course, they said, well, it never happened. All right, well, we got some remote viewers together, 11 remote viewers led by their former training officer, Lynn Buchanan, who's a good friend of mine, good friend of Linda's, and is quite a good remote viewer. And they took a look to see what had actually happened. And they saw a large object low to the ground, went to the ground. It was for transportation. It was silvery gray, black color. People observing the vehicle were interested and curious to see about it. There were biologicals who were disabled or hurt, blah, blah, blah. And so they confirmed that all this happened. So one of them even drew this building, said it's cube-like, campus-like environment, structure, a multi-story building, a path going around it. And one of them said, this is one of these government buildings that you hope you never go to. You may not come out alive, okay? So what we found out was the reason that even people in New Mexico today, in and around Aztec, will tell you it never happened, was because unlike Roswell, where they called in people from all over and then flew stuff to Fort Worth and then flew it to Wright-Patterson, and there's a lot of witnesses to say, yeah, something was going on. When Aztec occurred, they had learned their lesson. So they brought troops down from Colorado because Aztec sits almost on the border with Colorado. And nobody was called up from New Mexico to go up there and deal with this. So they can truthfully say today, we didn't hear anything about this. We didn't do anything. They brought everybody down from Colorado, and they scooped up everything, and they took it back. And reportedly, and according to the remote viewers, there were actually some live aliens involved, and they took them to this building, and they said they had hoped to make allies so they could gain technology, but due to the mental control these beings could exercise, they could not be kept secure, and the ship was dismantled, and the aliens were officially and formally executed. Maybe that explains why they don't land. Here's some drawings at the top that made by some of the remote viewers of just various type of UFOs that they've encountered. And then below are a couple of shots I picked up. These are actual NASA photographs of objects flying around the moon, near the moon. So don't let anybody tell you this is all nonsense. In fact, one of the remote viewers, it might have been Lynn Buchanan, who told me, he said, there's so many craft parked out in the atmosphere, in orbit around the Earth, that it looks like a parking lot. And I think we're drawing attention because, of course, first we got their attention by setting off thermonuclear devices, which sends energy burst all through the universe. And in fact, my line is, somewhere way out there, somebody goes, holy cow, the kids found the matches, So they want to come here and find out what we're doing, and they want to see. They probably don't care a great deal if we blow ourselves up. They just want to make sure that we don't cause damage to them and other parts of the universe. They also, of course, the remote viewers saw these standard type aliens, the short gray, the tall gray, the Nordic types, the reptilians, and the insect types, okay? And let me point out here that while these people were trained and operating as U.S. Army intelligence officers, they were never, ever officially tasked to go look at UFOs or to look at aliens, all right? Because their authorities didn't even believe all this stuff anyway, and they certainly didn't want them talking about that or getting them there. But I can guarantee you, having talked to just about every one of the official Army remote viewers that worked during the 80s and 90s, that every single one of them came to have a personal experience with UFOs. Ingo Swann tells the story about being tasked to go look at a secret Soviet submarine. And when he got there, he started describing this circular object, and it was silvery, and it was this, and it was that. And they said, was it in the water? And he said, no, it was in the air. And they said, are you talking about a UFO? And he said, yes. And they said, session ended, and they all got up and left. They didn't want to hear about that. So they all saw it. Now, here's what's pretty interesting, too. Mel Riley and Ed Dames and Dave Morehouse and some of these guys that were there in the unit at the time, and were talking privately amongst themselves on the fact that, yeah, they'd all seen these UFOs, and they're flying around in our atmosphere, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, well, where are they coming from? What's happening here? So they finally decided, instead of trying to look at each individual incident, why don't they track them back and find out where the headquarters is? And Mel Riley, for want of a better expression, said Galactic Federation headquarters. So he sits down to do this incredible remote viewing, and he said he saw this place where there were high, ragged mountains. There was a flat plateau, a pure blue-looking lake in front of it. His analogy was like Lake Titicaca, okay? And at this place was a huge pyramid. He says, I found myself moving up an inclined causeway with rough stone walls on both sides. At the end of the causeway is a long, dimly lit rectangular corridor constructed of smooth dressed stone on all sides, kind of a pyramid with this ramp going up to it. He said there's an entrance to a beautiful white pyramid-type structure on a rocky-like promontory, and there were these two, I guess you'd call them obelisks, on either side of this doorway. And when he went in, he said there was this cathedral-looking domed-type center piece, and on it was this almost like a dais or an altar, and he said he felt like it was familiar, like he'd been there, like he didn't feel strange or hesitant or anxious about this at all. In fact, he went and laid down on this altar, and he said This is his words. At the end of this inclined corridor is a large room with a very high vaulted seating. There's large polished stone platform in his room like an altar. There are white robed entities in a semicircular to one side. Their attention seems to be focused on the platform. The room is dimly lit. There's a feeling of something sacred, holy, almost religious about this place. He said it seemed familiar, and like as I've been there before. He climbed on the platform, lay down, and then was illuminated by a brilliant shaft of white light from head to toe. The light was coming from overhead, and a robed figure then moved from behind the group and stood next to me and put a hand out and stretched over my solar plexus. He said he got this incredible feeling of peace and contentment, and then he was back, in his body, and the session was over, and he felt like that they said, okay, you found us, here we are, go on. And they sent him back. Now, to show you that this is what blows me away, because in my book, The Alien Agenda, when I talk about and very quickly talked about remote viewing, and then I myself got, I think it was about 11 remote viewers, and I contracted with them to do a remote study on aliens. And this is where a lot of this information came from. At least several of them said that this place that Mel Riley was describing is on a distant world, and they drew drawings of what they saw. And I think you can see, now I tried, these were both together, so I wasn't able to separate them and blow them up, but if I could, I think you can see that this one looks incredibly like this. You got this Africa-looking continent on here, and you got the same thing over here. And they located the big city right here, and it's right here. So these are two separate viewers operating from coordinate numbers, and they get the same view. And you can also see this on some of the closer ups on others. These are two separate viewings of the supposed to be the world where this alien city exists. And as you can see, there's some differences, but there's also a lot of similarities, which tells me that they were actually looking at the same thing. It's just how we all view things a little bit differently. And this one really blows me away, because these are the two separate viewers showing the city on this world. And as you can see, it's the same. Obviously, they're looking at the same thing. And they both have the tower with a red stripe at the top. And here they've got a tower with a red stripe at the top. And they've got water. The water tanks are down here, and they've got those drawn in, and they've got the buildings on either side. Anyway, again, this is very persuasive evidence that these two separate viewers working from a number are looking at the same place. And Mel Riley drew this sketch saying this is his impression of what these hooded figures look like in Galactic Federation headquarters. Dave Morehouse told me that he went there too, and he saw a guy, a huge person, much bigger than us. He said if he stood up, that Dave is he's probably about close to 6 foot, and that he would probably have only reached this guy's knee. Okay, that's how big he was. And he's sitting on a throne-like chair, and that there was a bank of instruments over here with people moving their hand, or some kind of entities moving their hands around on the instruments. So these trained Army remote viewers actually saw some really strange and exotic stuff. And now, how much time have I got left? Anybody? All right, I'm just going to keep going. If I run over, somebody say, shut up. Now I'm going to tell you one of the strangest stories that I ever have come across. Some of you may have heard it, some of you may not. Is there an alien ghost in Roswell? Okay, we all know the story of Roswell. On July the 4th, 1947, an object crashed north of Roswell, New Mexico. Army units quickly cordoned off the area and cleaned up a massive debris field. This was the 509th. Oh, I'm doing all right. Okay, good. I got time for the alien ghost story. So we also know that at that time it was Roswell Army Airfield, and it was the headquarters of the 509th Bomb Group, which was the only military unit in the United States at that time to have nuclear weapons. And I think that's really important. Okay, and then according to the story, they recovered the crash saucer, they recovered a lot of debris, and they recovered 2 or more aliens, possibly one dead, 2 alive, okay? And they took them to, according to the legend, to the Army Army Airfield Hospital, where they operated on them. And the accounts vary. Some say they were trying to save them. Some say they were trying to dissect them. But anyway, the story is that live aliens were taken to the Army Air Force Hospital there at Roswell. And I did speak to the local mortician who said he was there working at the funeral home that day, and that he got a call from the base and wanted to know if he could supply 3 child-sized coffins. Okay, so again, more evidence that there really was something going on at Roswell, but I don't think I'm telling you all anything you don't already know. Okay, then with 1947, the Army Air Corps became the U.S. Air Force, and in the early 50s, they came at the same location where this Army Air field was, and they built Walker Air Force Base. And Walker Air Force Base was in use until about 1967 when it was phased out. And at that time, they took the base hospital and renamed it the New Mexico Rehabilitation Center. Now, this is now run by the state, and it is a facility for the rehabilitation and treatment of indigent patients, okay? If you can't afford to go to the doctor or whatever, you can come here. So back in the mid-2000s, I happened to be in New Mexico doing some filming on a documentary which had nothing to do with UFOs or aliens, but we needed an old 50s or early 60s looking hospital, and so I found myself here at this New Mexico Rehabilitation Center, and I was speaking with the assistant director, a very delightful lady. In fact, at this time, this was before Roswell really got the UFO fever. You know, now you go there and it's UFOs here, and there's UFOs on the roofs, UFOs on the lampposts, they're everywhere. Back then in New Mexico, it was a little bitty town, and they really didn't even want to talk about UFOs, okay? But being a little town, they were just, you know, polite, nice, friendly. And she was just great. And I said, you know, we'd like to come and do some filming here in your hospital. And she said, oh, yeah, sure. I said, come on. In fact, she said, you can go to this wing, the west wing over here, and go up on the second floor. I said, just go up there and said, you know, do whatever you need to do. And that would have been the end of it, except she had to add, the staff doesn't like to go up there. Well, you know, my journalistic hackles rose. And I said, well, why not? She says, well, there's stories floating around. They think it's haunted. Okay, well, now listen, being an old police reporter, this was nothing new on me. You go to any hospital that's been in operation for any length of time, and you probably can find some haunting stories, because that's just what happens at hospitals. People get sick, people are traumatized, people die, and apparently ghosts hang around, okay? So I wasn't that, but I thought that was interesting. So while the rest of the film crew went on up and set up cameras and started doing all their work, I went around and started talking to the people there at the hospital. And I talked to the telephone operator who'd been there for about 16 years. And then her mother had worked there even before that. And she said her mother told her. So it goes back into the early 50s that the stories were that this particular section of the hospital, that it was haunted, okay? And then I talked to the maintenance people, and they were saying, yeah, there's something going on there. Said at night, you know, we hear footsteps up there, and we go up there, and there's nobody there. The elevators will go up and down, and there's nobody there. And lights will come on and go off, and we go up there and hunt all around, and there's nobody there. Yeah, there's something going on there. So now I'm really kind of getting interested because, hey, this sounds pretty good. This is a good ghost story, you know. And so finally, I said, well, does anybody actually ever seen this ghost? And they said, yeah, some of the inmates, or patients, I take it rather, excuse me, some of the patients had seen it, And I said, well, how about any of the workers? And they said, well, yeah, and they pointed me to Nurse Josie Moroni's. And I remember she wasn't there the day I found out about her name, but they said she'll be on tomorrow night. So the next night I went back out there and I found Josie Moroni's and asked her about what she'd seen, and she said it was shocking, and it happened twice. The first time I didn't tell anybody because I figured they'd think I was crazy. But after I saw it a second time, I realized this is real. And I saw this figure no more than 5 feet tall, big old head, big dark eyes, and hands that had no fingers. They looked like mittens, or it was wrapped in some sort of shiny cloth. It was definitely not human. What? Where do you get this? It sounds like a little gray alien, right? So I'm going, maybe she's putting me on. But then I talked to some other people. They told me the same story. All right? So then we went back later to do some investigation, and we had a couple of psychics with us. And while we were up there on this second floor wing, they said, well, he's here. He's here now. We can feel him. Of course, I'm going, okay, where is he? And they pointed to this metal cabinet. Uh-oh, where's my thing? Here we go. They pointed this metal cabinet out in the hallway that they keep medicine and stuff in. And they said, he's right in the middle of that cabinet standing there. Of course, I couldn't see anything. Well, we had a fellow with a DeGauss meter or one of these meters that measures energy frequencies. Well, he went running over there and started running across this glass and metal cabinet, and it went beep, 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 right in the center of the cabinet where the psychic said the little short, big-eyed ghost was standing. So now I'm going, this is really getting strange. But there's the kicker. We took a satellite photo and we took some old overlays and we laid them over each other. And this hallway, which is now the New Mexico Rehabilitation Center, is at the exact location of the old Roswell Army Air Corps Hospital wing where, according to legends, the alien bodies were taken. So, is there an alien ghost at Roswell? You make up your own mind. In the meantime, you can read about all of this in my book, Sci Spies, Occulted History, and Alien Agenda, and I thank you for your time. Are we set up for questions? I'm not sure we're set up for questions, but if anybody's got something that they just can't hold back, good. All right. Y'all have fun, eat, drink, and be merry.